Hiya, folks. As promised, as warned, I'm going live here, and that's pretty damn brave, considering wiring filaments can be one of the most challenging and mistake-ridden tasks of any tube amp assembly. Anybody who's ever built one will tell you that, will understand what I'm talking about. I kind of got my whistle wet here because I haven't done a build in a little while, not recently, and so I'm going to do this. I don't really know exactly what I'm going to say. I'm just going to take you along with the journey. I'll give you a little bit of technical details, a little background as to why I do this, that, or the other. I kind of pre-started this wire. I'm going to go ahead and strip this so it's ready to go. And so a lot of people say, I've heard fellow amp builders lament that they despise wiring filaments. It's their least favorite part of a build. And yeah, it is tedious and it's tricky and it's difficult at times. But you know, the way I look at it is, for those of you who don't already know, this is, see what I'm saying? These little wires, they just don't want to cooperate. So you got to get them laid in here. Notice I bend these. What I want to have always, I hope you guys can see this. What I want to have always is, instead of having, let me get a little example here. Instead of having a wire go through and then solder, which a whole lot, almost all amps are built that way, I like to have, at a minimum, I like to have a surface going across the face of the pin of the tube. And even better yet, if possible, have it go all the way down, because you have a lot more contact area and a lot more secure connection. For filaments, I don't like to have them sticking up in the air. I like to have them laying down low profile. So I go with laying the wire across the face of the pin. So here we have two. This is a daisy chain. I did the first tube earlier. Now, for those of you who don't know, it definitely takes a technique to get a nice twist. I don't think I'm perfect, but you want these at the same angle. Hopefully you guys can see that. Oh no, how much have I been blocking? I'm hoping that this light didn't block too much of the camera view. Where was it? It was over. Oh, I hope it wasn't. My apologies if it was. Hey, John Silver, I see you on here. This is actually the first build of the 22 Tango other than a retrofit. And I'm calling it the 22 Tango Mod Bravo. In a new cabinet with the fancy backlit logo. It's going to be nifty. All right, see where we are. So I push these down. I like to get these away from, I want these into the center and out of the way as much as possible. I'm almost there. So here we go. Need a few more twists to get all the way up there. Yep, I'd say that's good. All right, so we'll pull down some 18 gauge. This is our green and black. This is the old Carroll cable. I still have the Carroll cable. When I run out of that, though, I'm going to have to find another source. This comes from Apex Jr. out in California. He's got all kinds of surplus, and I don't know. He's got good price on wire. It's getting really hard to find this sort of thing, as we're in a world that this sort of thing where we need actual wire and actual gauge, and it's kind of a dying concept. Okay, so I'm gonna take this into here, and then I'm gonna run this line. So we're wiring to pins. What are these? I think this is pin 7, 5, 6. I can't remember the numbers. I know the position. And up here to this pin, I should probably look at another chassis just to make sure. It is. Yeah, 5, 4, 5, 6, 3. Okay. Yeah. You don't have the convenient gap that with a preamp tube, you know that's pin 9 and that's pin 1 because you have that gap down there. So I'm just a dummy, what can I say? Alright, so I'm going to trim that right there, and I'm going to trim this right here. Alright, so let's nip this little dude. And let's nip this little dude. Let's get this guy. Get him up through this one pin. These octal base sockets have 2 holes, and I use them both. That to go through there, and same deal. I try to get these wires bent and smashed down so you have a flush connection. And let's get this one up through here. And I'll smash it down. So we're got a nice little flush bend over there, and another one down here. Just that pulled up a little bit. Let's get that. So I was thinking last night I would start pontificating a little bit about the state of live music. In the state of live music as it pertains to guitar amplifiers or lack thereof. This is where I'm going to get into pissing and moaning with Paul here. I don't know. I saw there's this photo or this little clip that's been going around. Some of you may have seen it. I'm not going to name any names. But I won't name names, but it's, a popular band that's making, I guess, their own tour this summer. It's a band from the last couple of decades, I guess. It has something to do with the lack of rigidity in a incorrectly spelled breakfast food. That's the name of the band. You guys figure that out. But it shows the guitar player dancing around and playing on the stage and just getting it on. I guess it's raining. And you hear the drums going boom, pop, pop, boom, 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 pop, 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 boom, 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 and he's just ripping that guitar like no tomorrow. And you can't hear a damn thing in terms of the guitar. I mean, maybe just a little sizzle of something in the background. And that's because either A, the amps are under the stage or off the side of the stage, or not even any amps at all. That's another one that's popular these days, using modelers. And I made a comment to someone. I made a comment on that, saying, lamenting that fact, and I said something to the effect of, if Jimi Hendrix had put his amps under the stage, generations, there wouldn't have been very many kids who have wanted to grow up and become a guitar player. There wouldn't have been many kids that want to play guitar, rock guitar anyway. Maybe there would have been some folkies out there. And of course, the response of the person that was commenting on my comment was, so if you just the visibility of the amps is what causes kids to want to play guitar, that's ridiculous. No, it's not the visibility of the amps. It's the presence of the amps and the presence of the energy coming from the amps. In the presence of the energy coming through the amps, interacting with the guitar player, making the guitar player do things that they might not otherwise do if their friggin' amps were under stage. It's the energy. It's the energy of that. Now, of course, maybe some people are playing a Princeton reverb or something, and it's not a huge amp with huge energy, although it still interacts with the guitar player. And then I ran across a Thin Lizzy video, had them live. They were all playing Marshall stacks, full stacks, not half stacks. And the energy was just freaking awesome. And, folks, it matters. It really matters. And it makes me very sad that we're at a point where, here's my opinion. People who like the modelers, people who want to have if it is an amp in a controlled environment and not on stage, they like the idea that it's easy to get an in-ear mix and the front of house guy's job is easier. And here's what I submit to you. Your job is not to make your life easier. Your job is to make our life more exciting. That's what I say. So, I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to do this more often. And I really don't give a crap whether people agree with me or not. Everybody's got a right to their opinion. I just happen to be right. I might call this wiring and whinging with Nolatone. Maybe that's what I'll do. A new series, wiring and whinging, about the state of music equipment in the industry. So notice down here, I didn't twist these wires. The twisting of the wires helps to cancel any hum you might get coming from an AC source. 6.3 volt AC for these filaments. And by the way, if it's not obvious, filaments are what make the tubes glow. When you flip on the amp and the tubes light up inside, those are the filaments glowing. They heat up so electrons can flow, so they can conduct. And that glowing is what, feeding that glow is what draws current. So, but you want them, this is down here in the preamp end, so any noise that gets picked up, any hum that gets introduced down here will be amplified. Whereas, and it's one stage each. So there's no phase cancellation down here in the preamp. This is, signal comes in here, phase gets inverted, signal comes in here, phase gets inverted. And when you get to the phase inverter, which is what this tube is, it's inverted at 180 degrees out of phase on each side. And then we come into the power tubes, and the power tubes cancel any hum that might be introduced. So it's not critical to have these twisted down here, and it makes for a much more economical wire layout, clean wire layout. So that's that. I've got to continue on with this. What I'm going to do next is I pulled all the components that are going to get used in this build. I pulled those last night. And I have to measure each one of them before I populate this turret board. So this is great fun. So I dump these all out. I get my multimeter. Set it to ohms first. I do the resistors first. And every one of these components has to get measured and has to be within the tolerance. So this is 1 meg. I can tell by, I've looked at these so long, these color coded. Each of these bands has a number. I think that's a 1, black is 0, green is, what is green? 5? That's the, anyway, I'm not going to go into that. You can look it up. But I know that's a 1 meg because you get used to looking at the colors. So that's 0.98. That's within tolerance. You know, the funny thing is I've measured every component that's gone into every Nolatone amp. And I don't think I've ever measured one that's been out of tolerance. Boy, I bet if I quit doing it though, I would run across some. That's 100K. I can tell by the color. 99.8. That's close. These are carbon film resistors. I use these all the way through because they're stable and accurate, and they still sound great. Some people have used carbon comp. Some people will say they sound different. I suppose maybe they do. But I promise you they were used in the 50s and 60s. 2.2K. Because that was the least expensive thing available. So I've thought about experimenting with carbon comp in certain locations, but I've been very successful with using carbon films in the audio path. 4.7K. This is a 47K. You can tell by the orange ring. 4.7K. It's got the red. It's got the red multiplier band. Here's another 1 meg. This is boring stuff, huh? Hope I'm not boring you guys to death. You guys have the freedom to browse onward. this is what goes into it. 220K times 2, 220K. That's a 470 amp 3 watt. This goes into my bias supply. 10K. 470R. 466 ohms. These 10K power resistors. These are metal oxide, I think. Use these in the power supply. These are 3 watts. $10K. Here's a big mama. This is a 3K 10 watt. This is a Dale wire wound. These are high quality and heavy. Okay. So now we go on over to capacitors. This is a 22.022, just 22 nanofarads. 0.022. Spot on. 0.1, which is 100 nanofarads. 104. Pretty dang close. Another 0.1. 102. 47.047, which is 47 nanofarads. Close enough. 0.22. Okay. 25 microfarads. These are always tend to be a little bit more than 25. So Sprague atoms. Expensive, but pretty much the gold standard for this type of cap. These are 1 microfarad Sol and fast caps. Use these in the master volume circuit. Extremely high quality. Solon. And this is a 0.01, which is 0.001 microfarad, 1 nanofarad. Now these guys don't register. This only goes down to 1 nanofarad. These little silver micas, I've never had one bad. But you just have to know where these are and listen. These get used in tone circuits and in bright cap. So you just have to listen for these and make sure they're correct. All right, so we're good to go with those. Let's crank up our get my drawing up on the screen here. Okay, some of y'all saw yesterday I was milling the turret board, and there was another little hiccup on the turret board. This is longer than the turret boards I've been doing. This is probably the longest one I've made yet in this size. And it's longer because I put capacitors on this board, and I also add the bias circuit down here, which normally I used to put the bias circuit on a separate little terminal strip. But at any rate, while I was cutting the ends off, it kind of drug the clamps loose a little bit, and it got a little wonky on the end here. That wouldn't be acceptable for production, but this is a prototype. And this board, this is 1/8 inch G10 fireproof, and it is extremely rigid. Plus the wires I use, I would not even have to bolt this thing to the chassis. which, by the way, I should probably check to make sure the holes line up. And they do. They do. This will be fine for the prototype. It's not going to be functionally problematic at all in any way whatsoever. I could even skip having a standoff here, even though I will have a standoff there, and I'll use a little washer for it to catch, but it would be fine without it, because these other three boards, it's not going to sag in any way. These other three, 1, 2, 3, 4, and what I use for the standoffs is let me show you. I use these little guys, these little plastic or nylon standoffs, and we go through the board, and then the standoff, and then through the chassis, and then we screw it on the other side with a cap nut. Now, I have seen amps built with metal standoffs that are threaded, and you thread through the board into the standoff, and then you put the standoff and thread another screw through the other side of the chassis into the standoff. So the body is threaded. Now, I don't like that because unless you run a screw all the way through with one screw, that's potentially 2 screws that can come loose. Whereas with this, I'm going to use a cap nut on the other side. And these cap nuts, this is not the same size as the screw, but you see they have these little teeth. And these little teeth, first of all, they compress when you tighten it down. Second of all, they dig into the aluminum a little bit. I have never seen one of these come loose that was properly tightened. Never. I prefer these to nylon insert, because nylon insert are hard to thread, and you have to use a tool to get them all the way down. With these, I can just whip it right down. Take my finger and just go get it started. Let me get rid of this washer. Get it started and then go whee, and down it goes. And they never come loose once you get them tightened down. So, as far as I know, I've never had one of these come loose on any of my amps built over the past 15 or more years. All right, so I'm going to stuff this board. So we start with 2.2K. So I don't do anything. Some people get all precious with the leads. I just try to place them. I wrap them. Make sure they have a good firm wrap around the turret. I try to go roughly 3/4 of the way around, and then I nip them. And also notice this turret and this turret are offset. That's because other things are going to go here. So I account for that on which way I wrap. So since another component is going to go into this side, I turn this lead counterclockwise around this turret and then clockwise around this turret, because let's go ahead and get our 25 in here. Of course, this one goes around the other way and meets in the middle. And I wrap over here, trim, cinch, inch. Okay, so these are both firmly on here. Now this is the last thing. I will solder these as soon as I know the last thing that's going to go on is in place, because that eliminates the chance that joggling this around could loosen up these connections. So what I go for when I'm soldering, you'll see, this is focusing okay. You'll see that you can see the leads under the solder. That's a little bit thinner than what I like. I'm going to hit it one more time. And you go on and you make sure that that solder can flow. Because what you need to make sure of is the turret gets hot, the component gets hot, and solder flows together on those. What you don't want is to have the lead getting hot and have solder flowing on the lead, but maybe the underlying turret is not hot enough. That's where you get a cold solder joint. And that's another one of those things that might work just fine for years and then suddenly start giving you problems. So I run my iron very hot. I run this about, I got this thing at about 850, 870 degrees. So I can get on fast, get it hot, and get off fast. Okay. So right here, we have a 0.1 microfarad that goes right here. But actually, it's a little bit tight. So instead of putting this on now, I wonder if this may have gotten pulled a little bit, because in the drawing I have a little bit more space for this. I have a little bit more space for this turret. So let me show you what I can do here. This is part of the process that is actually pretty interesting. Okay, I have the drawing here. I believe I have both date modified. I believe I have the turret board template. I do, but this is, I'll go ahead and open this up. I have these combined in a file where I have all these. Okay, so what I see here is a little bit too tight. It's this turret. So I'm going to disable snap, and I'm going to move this over just a tick. Maybe one width should be adequate. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to designate a modification, a patch level, if you will. So that's one change, and any other changes I come up with that I feel like I need based on what I find putting this prototype together, I will make those changes in the drawing. At any rate, this will not affect the build in any way, and I can go ahead and proceed. It's just I prefer to have these things as dialed in as possible when I come to production. So right here we have 47K. That's the benefit of building the boards in-house, building the chassis in-house. you can basically dial these things up to where they fit together more or less like a glove. And I think that's to great benefit of the overall product. 100K. Actually, I'm going to change this one. I'm going to go the other way because these components are going to come in this way. We're going to come in from another direction. So okay. And we need another 100K right here. Where are you, Mr. 100K? There you are. Okay, so this guy goes all the way. Down here. Trim, nick, tuck, nip, tuck. Cinch, cinch. Okay, so there's a connection I can go ahead and solder. 4.47K, yeah. Every single one of these has to be checked. Okay. So one more component that goes here is 250K, or sorry, 250 picofarad. We'll go ahead and put this in. And again, we have kind of offset. So I will stagger this guy in the middle and wrap it so it's straight. Plus it frees up more room for this component here that's going to go in. Cinch. Okay, I can go ahead and solder both of these now. And when you got more than one lead, you have to be very attentive. I've had cases where it looked fine from the top, but the bottom lead didn't have solder. That was another instance where the amp was fine and then started having a problem years later. So a little solder wicked out there. So that's a good flow. Now we can come in here and slide this guy in. Wait a minute. There is something that I want to do here. This will be a plate lead. I'm going to go ahead and solder the plate lead onto this, so we don't have to get this turret hot again after we put this other component on. Notice here I touch the solder to it to get it flowing, and then I feed it down into the hole, and I make sure that there's not a bubbling up of solder at the top, which indicates that it didn't get it didn't flow into the hole properly. So you can see it doesn't go all the way to the bottom. You can see because there's a fillet there, that indicates that if there's like a bead of solder at the top, that means the inside of the hole did not get hot enough for it to flow down into the hole. The solder is going to flow where the heat is. So, all right, good to go there. Let's make sure it's all right. So in we go. Guess maybe someday I'll do a time lapse of this. That's all that goes here, other than the attachment to the tube socket. And here's another very important one because there are 3 leads on this guy. I have a hot sponge over here that I tap the soldering iron, and I'll also move it to the inside. And you see the solder is flowing from touching the turret, which is crucial because that means the turret is hot enough. As you see, it's a nice looking. You can see 1, 2, 3. You can see all 3 wires. You can see the fillet, and you can see the solder flowing between them. Okay, those are solid. That's going to be a ground point, which I'll attach. I use a star grounding system. I'll attach wires underneath when I'm done with this. So we proceed on with our tone stack. I take the pliers and straighten the leads. Don't be paying attention to the values. This is kind of special little tweak here. I'm not going to show you how I wire the pots, because how I wire the pots has something to do with what makes this tone stack unique, or makes it different than a Fender and different than a Marshall. So the way this thing works, and John Silver, you can tell us, you can dial this thing up to where you can play cowboy chords hard on a Strat and it won't fart out, because you can roll off enough bass to prevent that on the neck pickup. Or you can dial as much bass as you might like. The original 22 Tango, the first version, didn't have that capability. So if you knew what you were doing with that amp, it sounded absolutely fantastic, but it can make you sound like a real fool too. Just depends on how you hit it. This amp, this version, it's more balanced tonally, and it's more forgiving. It still has the glorious bloom and big, huge, swirly 3D clean, but it's not as it's very hard to make it sound bad. So even if you sound bad, and I should know, I'm the king of sounding bad when it comes to playing guitar. Those who play, play. Those who can't, build. All right. I'll give these a look now. That one looks good. These look a little bit light still. And then I give it all once over at the end before I move forward in case I forget to check something along the way. I got to get some water. Stand by. Interwebs. I'm not used to constantly yammering while I'm doing a build. I usually do it in silence. Okay, moving on. Okay, we need a 4.7K. That's a 47K. I don't want that. I need a 4K7. Where are you, Mr. 4K7? I believe that's what that is. 4K7, yes. All right. And this was a discovery I made recently. Even your amp does not have this, John Silver. If you're listening, I saw that you joined. I made this discovery. I noticed that the amp had some hiss even with the volume turned all the way down. And I'm like, what the hell? And as I said, this amp started out being not a Marshall, but definitely having more DNA from the Marshall circuit than from a Fender circuit, unless you're talking about a 59, the original Tweed Bassman. Or I think maybe the Twins were the same. Maybe the Twins were. I don't know. I'd have to look at the schematic. But I do know the Bassman is what the first Marshalls were based on. And it borrowed more from that than it did a blackface amp. Even though Deluxe Reverb had 6V6s just like this does. And this was a holdover originally. The first retrofit, this point in the amp was a holdover from the original circuit, which at this point was the cathode circuit for a cathode follower, which drove the tone stack at the time. That's one of the big differences between Marshall and Fender blackface is the Marshall has a cathode follower driving the tone stack, whereas the Fender is a plate-driven tone stack. And where Marshall, at this point in Marshall, you probably have an 820 ohm resistor right here. And the smaller the resistor value, the higher the idle level of the stage that the cathode, this is a cathode circuit. And this is a cathode circuit just for a regular triode amplification stage, not a cathode follower anymore. That's one of the differences in the in the updated 22 Tango. And the lower the value here, the less resistance there is for current to flow through the tube, and the higher the idle current is. So this is a 4.7K up from 820 ohms. So that's 6 times 8, 40. That's about 6 times more resistance. So it causes that stage to idle much lower, and it pretty much wipes out the hiss, and that was the difference. And you also get the added benefit of more clean headroom, because if I change this to an 820 ohm, this resistor, that stage produces more gain, so there's less clean headroom. So there you go. Okay, I need some 22 microfarad power supply capacitors. There's two. I did not pull these last month, so. Yeah, let's get my no caster. I was experimenting with pickups in my tellies a while back. Ordered a set of custom shop no caster pickups. That's another topic I won't get into right now. Maybe I will another time. Okay, so straighten these out. What I gotta do, don't forget, gotta measure them. Got to check them. 22 microfarads. This is the negative end. Doesn't really matter in terms of the measurement. That's good. No leakage. It holds. Let it hold for a few seconds. Good to go. These are brand new. These are F&T, German made. I like them in spite of that. Just kidding. F&T, these are, you know, on par, maybe even better than Sprague Atom. They're excellent quality. So this has got to go here. But instead of doing that, I'm going to go ahead and wire this phase inverter section first, so I don't have to get soldering iron close to this guy when I'm there's plenty of clearance, so that's not a problem. I just want to get these done. Sequence these ahead of that, just to make sure I'm avoiding any chance of getting a soldering iron on the body of that capacitor. So here we go. Typical long tail pair. Everybody recognizes this. Anybody that's full of these amps at all. Cinch it. I wonder if Instagram has a limit on how long I can stay live. All right. Get these two. Hey, if you're bored, imagine how I feel. I'm stuck here for the entire duration regardless. Okay, so these two are the only two that are going to wrap. The other two part resistors that go here to here and here to here are going to go down through the top. So I'll go ahead and solder the bottom here. All right, and we have a 470R. That goes in the front, and a 22K that goes in the back. Pretty much a standard deluxe reverb style phase inverter, although this is not a deluxe reverb. So what I do with these is I go put these together, feed them down the pipe about as far as I want to go till they are going to be fairly well centered between where I want to go with these. Close enough. Come in the back and I give them a little tweak so they will not move. I'm going to wrap this guy. And I'm not going to wrap this one yet because I'm going to wait till I have the other components that are tied into here. But I can go ahead and solder. Again, what I said about the top is you make sure that did you see how it was bubbling up and then it wicked down into the turret? That's what I'm talking about. Notice also that I'll start the solder flow by touching the tip, and that releases a little bit of flux. This is flux core solder, and that flux transfers heat and helps get the solder flowing. All right, that looks good. Now, right here we have our 0.001 microfarad, 1 nanofarad. This is actually, this turret is actually not getting used here. This would be used if we had an effects loop in this to tie in the return, or the send and a return. So to give this a little standoff from this turret though, in case I were to use it or in case I were to modify this amp later to use it, I'm going to wrap these this way, which gives us a little bit more spacing, whereas if I wrap the other way, it would tend to push this over against that turret a little bit. So you'll see strange things with with my amps sometimes that look like, well, why did he do it? Why did he not wrap this going clockwise opposite of this resistor? Well, those are the types of that's one of the reasons why you might see stuff like that. The turret doesn't care which way it's wrapped on, at least as far as I know. I'm sure there are people out there that'll argue that it matters, and I don't believe it does. In fact, I'm quite certain it does not. Now, what I need to do now is get some red wire. Yeah, that'll work. Get a piece of red wire here. Wrap it here. This is the line from that plate supply. Actually, I need a little bit more. A little bit more wire. From the plate supply, it's going to go back to the phase inverter. That good and tight. That Teflon wire likes to slide. All right. Okay. Yeah, let's pop a little bit more. Okay, let's nip this bad boy. You gotta be careful not to nip. Oh, see, look what I did. Moron. I was going to tell you, you got to be careful not to nip the component below, but I actually nipped the wire that I was trying to solder. or trying to install. That's my idiot move of the minute. I'm sure there will be another one in the next minute. All right. I can use that for something short, so I won't throw it out. Let's go ahead and get some more. Another stretch of red. Let's do this again. Take two. Okay, wrap. Not that kind of wrap. Wrap with a W. Let's go ahead and eyeball, snip, strip. Obviously I didn't get that on tight enough. Let's crimp that again, or let's nip that again so we can, shouldn't just fall off if I have it good cinched on there. There you go. That's better. Now, I want it to be about right there, so I'm going to grab it about right there, and then I'm going to nip it about right there. I think one of the most challenging parts of learning to build an amplifier is developing the confidence to know when to cut. I remember when I first was into this, I was always afraid of having something cut too short, to the point where it really held me up. Okay, there's one. Gotta be careful not to cut the wire underneath or the wrong side of the wire you're working with. Okay, cinch it. These are good and tight. That's good and tight. We'll go ahead and solder this. Put it down there. Now, that's good to go. Notice I haven't soldered this yet because this filter cap is going to go right here. Now, what I like to do with these is I like to bend these down and then bend them out, so we don't bend these or put tension on these at the body, because they are tall. They're almost taller than the turret. So you have to make sure they're the connection can. So what we do here is we kind of have to hold it and wrap it, and do the same thing over here. I don't know if you can see that. The idea is you don't want to spring that bend out of whack. You want it to be clean. When you're trying to wrap it, it can pull that bend out of whack. Now, so this is a filter cap. This will be another ground point. The little notch up here, that's the hot side. You'll notice that this has come loose a little bit. Actually, no, it hasn't. It's an optical illusion. Well, maybe it has. So what we want to do here is cinch that up really good. Make sure all these, what I try to do is make sure these don't have a lot of play. See, there's a bit of play there. So try to turn that and get everything good and snug, so there's a good connection up against the turret. Because what I don't want to have is an air gap between the turret and the lead. Yet another thing that can cause problems down the road. Okay, that's pretty good, although it's kind of a blob at the bottom I don't like too much. Let's see if we can wick some of that up to the top. Yeah, that looks better. Now you can see distinctively the different leads, the 3 leads. Now I'll have to have a dropping resistor put into here. I'll tie that in underneath the board. And let's make sure the back is good and cinched. How's the weather where you guys are at, whoever's on here? If you're commenting, I'm sorry, I can't see the phone. It's above my brow here. It's above my brow because I'm focusing on this mess. All right, good to go. Now let's move on down to finishing up the phase inverter circuit. And I'm going to do this little piece first. This is a 47K, the negative feedback resistor. And that's a little bit different than a Fender 2. Although it's more about the ratio. The original 22 Tango did not have negative feedback either, which is part of what made it such a wild ride. Extremely lively, but this thing has very little negative feedback. But it does have just a touch. Just to kind of keep it reined in a little bit. And build in just a little bit of forgiveness. But it's still very rewarding to play. So one of the other differences between the original 22 Tango and the 22 Tango Mod Bravo. I think I like it. That's not set in stone. This is just a prototype. What do you guys think of this Mod Bravo? Is that a keeper? I didn't want to say Mark II because people have used that. I didn't want to say 2.0 because it's not software. I could say Gen 2, but that's a Glock thing, and I don't like Glocks. The triggers suck. In my opinion. All right. This is the tail resistor for the negative feedback. I guess that's what you'd call it. I don't know. Maybe you didn't call it that. 4K7, 4.7K. All right, so this is starting to come together. We'll go ahead and solder this up here because nothing else going there. There will be ground wires going here, so I'm going to hold off on soldering that. And now we can put in the resistor. So here's another one of the funky things about how I will decide which way to wrap. For this one, I'm going to wrap counterclockwise, but down here, I'm also going to wrap counterclockwise. Because notice, if I move it over here and wrap it on this side, it's a little bit closer to that turret, which I'm going to solder when I put the final, build the final, do the final amp build out to put the negative feedback lead there. So I'm going to put this here on this side of the turret to give it a little more space. So I can get it in there without. Now if I wanted to go crazy, I could put this one there as well. But that doesn't really buy me that much at that point. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it that way. It's all about feelings. Just feelings. Either way is right. Neither way is right or wrong, other than it's wrong to burn up a component with a soldering iron. That's pretty much always wrong. But it's just about feelings. Get around there. All right, so this end is ready to solder. I'm going to go ahead and now I can go ahead and drop this guy on there. So we've got 1, 2, 3, got 4 different components on this one. So we're really going to have to pay attention when we solder it. And also when we trim, don't want to cut the wrong thing. Okay. All right, so let's get this bad boy. I'm going to hit it with solder. That will get it flowing. You'll notice it's going to start flowing even when I just touch the wires in the turret, because that has gotten the heat flowing. It's really easy to do once you get the hang of it. And that's a good looking solder joint. You can see each wire, the outline of each wire. I'm going to hit just a little bit more on the very top there. I don't know, can you see that? Maybe you can. All right. All wired up. Now, we're on the home stretch. I need to find some 82K resistors. That's what I couldn't find last night. I think they're in this box. Or maybe they're not. I've used 100K for years, and it doesn't, I can't say that it matters. These are the plate load resistors for the phase inverter. Yeah, they're not, there's nothing there. Not in there. I may just use 100K. Theoretically, there's a slight difference in how each side of the phase inverter operates. There's some explanation for it. I've never noticed it mattering one way or another. These are all 100K. I had a few 82K resistors around for a while, and 150. And we're just using them. I really don't see that there's a difference. I've never been able to hear a difference. So I'll probably just go with what I have. One bag. Yeah. So I'm going to go with all the original Nolatones had 100K and 100K. So any change to the, actually this would have been the first that had an 82K and 100K. So let me pull one more 100K out of here. And I need to check the measurement again. 99.7. That'll do it. Okay. And these are handled just like the 1 meg resistors in the phase inverter. Same deal, same arrangement, except you got to put it in the right place. I just about put it in the wrong place. That would have sucked. Okay. I put the mounting hole right here between these two because I know there's nothing that goes there. So there's nothing that's going to obscure the screw is going to be in the way of. That's another benefit of, I have the CAD drawing of. Here, I'll just go ahead and show you. You can see that. I have the CAD drawing of the board right next to the CAD drawing of the chassis. I believe that's the chassis. Yes. It shows me how to bend it, the bending sequence. I cut and bend these in-house. So I move these mounting holes to facilitate what I'm going to do with this layout. Chassis layout, there it is. So, and if you'll notice, I have the chassis drawing right here. I'm building the drawing for the circuit on top of the chassis. And you'll also notice that there's very straight lines between where these sockets, and as straight as possible for the controls. Now, this outer circle here, this represents the diameter of a chicken head knob. So you have to be able to turn these knobs. That's the one consideration, but other than that, I pretty much put these as close to where they need to go as possible. I haven't finished drawing the leads. I'll get to that probably tonight. So yeah, so there's a lot of power, a lot of benefit to having the chassis drawing on top. It's an overlay on the circuit drawing. It's an overlay on top of the chassis, which really gives me flexibility to customize these things together. I really think that that's powerful. I believe it makes a difference. All right, so I got this and done with these two, so I can go ahead and, whoops, that one's not very tight, so let's cinch that up. You're tricky to get to, you little bugger. Getting there. These small things matter. This is why it's just me. I don't think I can get anybody to go into this level of detail with So I am the only person who's ever built a Nolatone amplifier. I've seen other builders go through the factory and talk about my guys, and I'm sure my guys, I'm sure their guys are great, but their guys aren't putting their name on their identity on these amplifiers. And sometimes those guys have a girlfriend who's pissed off at them about something and on the phone hassling them or texting them or whatever. And sometimes these guys just miss stuff. I've had multiple amps from very reputable builders come across my bench. People I know bringing them over, what's going on with this thing. I don't do this. I don't hang my shingle out as a repair tech, but over the years I've looked at amps mainly as a favor to people that I know, but I've seen, things just not even soldered. And it's easy to do. I mean, attention to detail is extremely important with this stuff, and to get distracted and take your eye off the prize for a minute, that's human. That's normal. It happens. I've done it. I try to make sure my process accounts for it, though. Over the years, I've tweaked my process, and I'm never going to claim to never make a mistake, but it's fewer and further between something not getting done right on these as time goes by. Because if I do forget something, I remember it, and I try to make good and sure my process accounts for it. And part of that is that I will go through and carefully inspect every single connection on this board before I install the board in the chassis. And then when I'm done with the chassis, I'll go through and carefully inspect every connection from input jack to output jack all the way through. Okay, these are good to go. Those look good. Now, here's a couple of 22Ks. Straighten these out. Well, these guys will fit right in here. The next two caps don't fit quite that way, so I have to get creative with those. I wonder if my phone's running out of memory yet. Okay, those are good to go. No play. What I'm doing over here is I have a wet sponge, and I learned this in the Navy. You thermal shock the soldering iron tip with a wet sponge, and it makes it good and shiny, and it basically blows off any oxidation. It's one of the first things they taught us in the Navy in soldering school. And that looks good. Although I do need to change my sponge. It's starting to get pretty ragged over here. You guys see this? I guess it's still in frame, isn't it? Snip, snip. Again, careful. Get down here and nip this 100K lead down here. Okay, that looks good. That looks good. Now we get to get fancy. These little guys are not as little and not as dainty as the Mallory M150s. Of course, given their full 1 microfarad, I guess they're still pretty compact considering these are only 250 volts. They don't need to be very high voltage. Because they don't come in contact with B+ directly. These are 630 volts because there's B+ right there. So what I'm going to do here is I've got to get these going from here to here. So the way I do that is instead of trying to slam them in there, which it won't go, I use actually I'm going to use a screwdriver for this one. And I just put it out here and bend it around. That should work. So I come down here. Just got started right down here. Ooh. Okay. Now, I like to come in this side. Looks like I got a hole over here somewhere. Might come in handy. Yeah. I'm going to pull it in a little bit more. And I like to come to the inside because it assures a really complete wrap. I think the old mil spec stated that, see, this is tricky because this is trying to come loose back here, and cinch this. I'm gonna go ahead and solder this so it doesn't move on me. I don't really like the angle there. Let's fix that up a little bit. There we go, that's better. I believe a mil spec was that the wire is supposed to wrap around 3/4 of the turret. So you have, well, 1, 2, 3/4, and then the back half is open. Of course, I don't think it hurts to have the back half open, other than by leaving one face open, you can get a soldering iron in there to make sure you're getting good heat transfer. There we go. It looks good. You see the little brown crust there? I don't know if you can see that. That's the flux. And when it dries, it'll just chip off. That's the flux core and solder. Now, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to wait to bend this one. Where'd my other capacitor go? Did anybody see where the capacitor went? Didn't knock it on the floor, did I? Or in the trash can. I had it right here. No, wait. There it is. I only pulled one out. My bad. Okay. So let's get this guy wrapped. So for those of you who love a clean amp, more of an American clean, I mean my V-style, my chimey-limey amps are wonderful, but it's a different kind of clean. You owe it to yourself to check out this 22 Tango, because it is, in a world where everything has been done over and over and over again, this thing is a little different. I think in a good way. All right, so let's do this. Let's use our screwdriver again. I don't know if you can see this over here. Can you see this over here? I'm just going to run it over here real quick and turn it. What I did was I have a hole that I used to put plugs, and maybe usually it's a 1/4 inch hole that I use for 1/4 inch plugs to wire those things up. I use it as a little holder. So I just stuck the screwdriver in there and bent the wire using that. Came out clean. I like that. That works nice. You know, every time I do this, I might come up with a new trick. Something that I haven't done before. Little discoveries here and there. Just little small things that make life easier. I learn something new every single time I do one of these builds. All right. Now, a little light on that top lead. I want a little bit more. Not too much, just a touch. You want to be able to see the leads. That looks pretty good. All right, what's next? Here we have our bias circuit. So that's what this big old 470R is for, 3 watts. It's not high current, so I don't worry about, I've never had a problem using a metal film here. Suppose you could use a metal oxide. This guy, as with it, a 1N4007, is that what that is? A little diode, little bitty guy. And we check these with, this multimeter has a diode feature. One direction should beep. That's not the direction. You hear the beep? That means it's good. It's a polarized device. And the stripe, see that little stripe there? It goes this way. That's kind of jabberwocky there, isn't it? That looks better. I should probably put that underneath. Since that resistor's taller, I think it'll lay better if I do that. I'm gonna put it underneath. Yeah, that's gonna look better. Yep. All right. Snip, snip, snip. That one's done. Solder it. Looks good. All right, so I need a 22 microfarad, 160 volts. Is that what this is? Okay, 33 microfarad, that'll work. I upgraded these. The very first ones had 22, but I found I had to buy kind of an off-brand to find that value. So F&T had a 33 microfarad, which is a higher quality capacitor, which always makes me feel better. I'm not going to cheap out, buy a capacitor for $4 versus 50 cents. So this guy, this is the ground down here. So the positive goes to the ground, and then we have a 10K. I'm going to go ahead and wire in the 10K before I put the capacitor in. And this goes positive into ground. And we do this because we want a negative bias voltage. Otherwise, you're going to get positive voltage, and your tube is going to run away. We need a negative voltage on the grid for a fixed bias amplifier. All right. right, there we go. I'm gonna go ahead and solder this. I can put any grounds I need through the center of the turret. This will go off to the bias pot, which will be mounted on the chassis. That looks good. Those look good. Now, the last filter cap. 22 microfarads. I usually use even smaller ones in the, I learned a long time ago. I was building some time ago, several years back, I was building 3 versions of what at the time was called the Nolatone Roadhog. I was building, well, really 2 versions. I was building one with, it was my modified take on a Marshall Plexi, but I was building one version that had power supply and output section like a JTM 45, an early one, and another one that had a power supply and output section like a late 60s Plexi. If you look at those, look at the schematics on those, I mean, not only, you know, the KT66s are in the JTM 45, and the 68, 69 Super Lead Plexi, those had EL34s, and obviously that's a difference. But the other difference is you'll notice the power supply filtering capacitors, and I think a JTM 45 had a GZ34 rectifier, and the Plexi 60, 68, 69 Plexi had diode rectifier, solid state. And part of that is because they had to do that because they were using larger value filter capacitors. With a tube rectifier, you don't want to use too large of capacitors because the inrush can cause that rectifier to arc. I'm sure there are other technical facts about that someone else can weigh in here if they choose to. But anyway, I noticed if you look at the Super Lead, it has larger value capacitors in down towards the plates and the screen supply for the output section. But going down into the preamp, you have like a 32 microfarad. These down here in the preamp, these filter caps are 32 microfarad in a Super Lead Plexi, and then later ones had even 50 microfarad, I think, in early 70s and on. And that's part of why the amps in the 70s seem to have that harder edge to them, I believe, because these reservoir capacitors, they filter the pulse DC that happens after you run the AC, the high voltage secondary, through the rectifier. They filter it out into DC, but they also store energy. And that storing of energy, and when you hit a note and they discharge to reproduce the note as current is drawn through the system, and then they recover and charge back. And the size and capacity of those capacitors has a lot to do with how an amplifier feels and how it responds. And it doesn't get talked about a lot, but I made the discovery building a JTM 45 output section and a 50 watt Plexi output section. And I noticed the JTM 45, which the Plexi down here will have 32 microfarad. The JTM 45 only has 16 microfarad. so half the capacitance. And I noticed that the JTM45, you know, the harmonics were just kind of jumping off the notes. It was really kind of a stunning difference working with these two at the same time, side by side. And that's part of why an old Vox sounds the way it sounds, is because it has very small filter capacitors, and the way those things feel, and that the attack of them has a unique feel, and also the recovery, they call it the bloom, when they swell into you hit a note and then over time it starts to almost get louder as it sustains, and that's bloom. And that's because Vox has even smaller. It has 8 microfarad reservoir caps down in the preamp. So I use 22s in the 22 Tango. No coincidence there. I mean, it's what I originally used, and I think it has something to do with the punchiness that amp has. Normally, I would probably put 16 microfarad in this circuit, but I'm sticking with the 22 because I think it has something to do with the level of punchiness. I wouldn't want to go any higher because you might miss and lose out some of that bloom and some of that touch sensitivity. Look at that. So from here, I go through once again, end to end, every one of these. I check all these. That's not soldered yet because I'm going to add ground leads. See, look there. I didn't solder that. Now there will be another lead coming in, but I'll put it down through the top of the turret. That's where the bias tap for this power supply has a bias tap that goes right here. So I caught one. You also got to make sure you catch the ones in between, you know, in the center of the board. That's kind of jabberwocky. Let's fix that one. That one's all cocked up sideways. Probably doesn't hurt anything, but I take away style points. That's better. These look good inside. These look good. And again, you got to be very careful to make sure you get the leads on the bottom. They can hide down there and not get soldered. Negative feedback. Those are good. There's a little globule of solder right there. Get that off of there. That has nothing hooked to it. If I put a effects loop in here, that will get used. And that would get used if I had a boost circuit. By default, I just wire this in. This cap could get switched in and out if you wanted to switch it out and then switch it in to get a boost. But I find that I always left the boost on because that stage that I use, this uses a special the special pentode stage that you've heard me talk about in other videos. It's designed to have that bypass cap there, and I rarely ever turned it off, so I decided to make it an option if you want it switchable. I prefer to keep things as simple as possible and not have any more switches than I really have to. So we're good to go there. Oh look, forgot to trim these off. These little guys. And then I'll be putting some wires under the board, but for now I'm Not going to worry about that. I think it's time for a break. If you guys watch this whole thing, you are sicker than I am because I didn't have a choice. I had to be here. But you had a choice. Anyway, I hope everybody's well. Nobody's dying today, I hope. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining.